In this video, we'll learn the basics of painting and erasing here inside of MARI. Okay, so you can see on my screen here, I've got kind of the exact same spot we left off in the previous video. I had painted a few of these white blobs and I'd baked them down into my texture. Now I am working on a painted detail layer inside my my leather details group. So I don't want these white blobs to stay here. Now, MARI's brush engine is one in which it affects a number of different tools. And the two tools we're going to focus on in this video are the paintbrush tool and the eraser tool. Now, the paintbrush tool is right over here. I currently have it active. And the eraser tool is right over here. It looks like a little rubber eraser. Now, we can switch to the eraser tool simply by hitting the E key on our keyboard. And we can switch back to the paintbrush tool by hitting the P key, like paint. So we can switch back and forth between those two tools very, very quickly. Now, I mentioned here that the paint that we had baked couldn't be erased right now. And, well, yes, technically that is true. We can't grab our eraser tool and erase that paint away. Keep in mind that the eraser tool is only for paint that is currently in the paint buffer. So this paint is no longer in the paint buffer. It's been baked down onto our layer. So we have to use a little different method for actually removing this paint. So let's go ahead and do that first. Let's go ahead and move back to the paintbrush tool. And we'll go ahead and hit the P key. And let's jump up here and change the painting mode. Notice the painting mode is here in my tool properties toolbar. It's also over here inside my projection palette. But if we drop this down, you'll notice that there are just a tremendous amount of painting modes. Now the second one from the top right below normal is called clear. This is the painting mode you'll want to switch to if you want to clear paint off of your textures after it's already been baked down. So let me just show you. I'll just come in here now and I'll start to paint this texture away. Now you want to be really careful because when you're clearing away texture, it's going to clear away all the texture that you're painting on top of for the current paint target. Now if you remember, my current paint target is this layer right here, this painted detail layer, and it just so happens in this area right here, that is the only paint that was on that layer. So now, important thing to remember here is that I've switched my bake behavior over to clear only. And remember, that paint that we painted into the buffer had to be manually baked down to the surfaces of the model. Well, that's the exact same thing that's going to happen here with the clear painting mode. So basically, I'm painted in some paint, and we're using that paint to clear off paint that's already there. But until I bake that down, you can see that paint is still in my buffer. So we'll go ahead and line that paint back up with that paint that was baked, and I'll go ahead and bake it again by tapping the B key on my keyboard. You'll see here it'll take MARI just a moment to bake that down, but as soon as it does, it's going to finish removing that paint from that target layer. So a real important thing to remember here is the eraser only erases paint from the paint buffer. It does not erase paint that has already been baked. In order to erase that paint that's already been baked, we need to use the clear painting mode. Now, one thing that I am notorious for doing is forgetting that I've switched to my clear painting mode, and then I go back to start painting after a time, and I can't figure out why I can't paint anything. So a good habit to get into is to always remember to switch your painting mode back to normal immediately after you're done painting with that clear painting mode. So we can do that by dropping this down and choosing normal again. Or we can hit Control-0 on our keyboard, and that will switch us back to that normal painting mode. Which, by the way, there's a keyboard shortcut to switch to the clear blend mode as well, or clear painting mode. It's Shift Backspace. So if I hit that keyboard shortcut, you'll see I switch to clear, Control-0, back to normal. All right, great. So that paint is now gone. And I do have my paintbrush tool selected here. Now let's talk a little bit about workflow while we're painting with this brush. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my display properties here. And I'm going to turn on my heads-up display. Because this is one of those situations where there's some valuable information in the heads-up display that's available to us. And it did not come up. Let's try that one more time. There we go. All right. So with the paintbrush tool selected, notice the tool help down here. There's things we can do in terms of radius, rotating the brush tip, the opacity, and the squishing of the brush tip. Now I'm going to choose a little different brush for this example, just so we can get off of something that is so symmetric in this elliptical shape. Let's go ahead and hold down the K key on our keyboard. Now this K key is bringing up the shelf pop-up. We saw this earlier, but you can get to these same tabs from your brush editor with this Shelves tab right here. There we go. And you can also get to this through the Shelf palette. I usually don't have that open. I'll usually just use the K keyboard shortcut to grab that. But we can come in here and we can just grab maybe an organic brush. And I'll just grab this storm cloud brush here. We'll go ahead and let Mari load that up here. Looks like it is thinking about that. There we go. So you can kind of see what this looks like over here inside the brush editor. Now we're going to dive more into this palette here in just a bit, but you can see how Mari is actually showing me a preview of what that brush tip looks like here for my cursor. So let's hold down the R key on our keyboard and there we go. Okay, hold down the R key and you can drag left and right. I'm using a Wacom stylus here. So holding down the R key is allowing me to dynamically change the radius of the brush tip. Now there's actually a inner radius and an outer radius. You can see that little red dot in the center of my cursor. If we drag up and down, we can actually increase and decrease the inner radius. We'll talk about that more in an upcoming lesson, but basically just know that the inner radius is how small the brush tip can be based on pressure sensitivity. So the W key on our keyboard is going to rotate that brush tip. The O key on the keyboard is going to change the opacity, and you can watch this change right up here inside my Tool Properties toolbar. So if I hold down the O key and drag left and right, we can change the opacity dynamically, and the squish is the Q button on the keyboard. We can squish the brush tip. There we go. So those are some really handy keyboard shortcuts related to the paintbrush tool. Now watch what happens. If I switch over to the eraser is basically the exact same tool as the paintbrush tool. We can again assign an alpha to the brush tip. So I'll just come in and grab that exact same storm cloud alpha. And once we do, what you'll see is that the same keyboard shortcuts work with the eraser tool as well. Again, the radius, the rotating, the opacity, and the squish. So these are pretty standard keyboard shortcuts, and once you learn them, you may not need the heads-up display turned on to remember them, but these are the basic keyboard shortcuts that you'll want to memorize as you're working with both the paintbrush and the eraser tool. And now, if we wanted to, we could come in here and select our color and really get busy starting to paint in some variation here on the surfaces of this armor. So you can see here that I'm currently not painting anything at the moment. We'll just make sure that we're selected the paint, and I am on the eraser tool. Let's go ahead and switch back to the paintbrush, and there we go. So yeah, now all we would need to do is come in and start to select a color and start to paint that in. And we could come in and paint a little bit, and then we could come in and erase back some if we wanted to. Just really start to create the look we're going for. Now again, I mentioned that this is flat colored armor on the shoulders here, so I might want to come in and paint some lighter brown tones into this, just to kind of give it a bit more variation, not white. So let me go ahead and clear the paint buffer. But now that we're getting into painting here inside of Mari, there's some important things you need to understand about masking. And I'm not talking about layer mask. We've already covered that in a previous video. What I'm talking about now is called projection masking. And we'll learn about that in our next video.